The last time I had my next guest on, she was wrapping up her film Blood on the Mountain, which has since been acquired by Netflix and earned an Emmy nomination. Say that 3 times fast. She's here to talk about that with us and with a lot that's going on in her home state of West Virginia, where really we ought to be talking more about what's going on there. So Mari-lynn Evans is the executive producer of many television and video programs, including The Appalachians, Coal Country, which was for PBS, Coal Country for Discovery, Planet Green, Living Well, A Guide to Healthy Aging, which, as I told Mari-lynn, I think I missed the deadline for that one, but maybe not, and several others as well. So without further ado, Mari-lynn Evans, thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure and an honor to speak about West Virginia and the people of Appalachia.
Well, you know, I've always loved Appalachia. I've always loved West Virginia. I've always loved the culture and just the niceness of the people there. And I think a lot of people, I mean, we might as well start out with this. I think a lot of people who don't live in that area, haven't visited or spent any time there, have a my feeling is that they have a kind of two-dimensional picture of what people are like there. Does that sound right to you too?
Unfortunately, it is true. And one of the reasons for those stereotypes that have harmed our culture so much economically and also harmed us, you know, as a people, these negative stereotypes, these, you know, horrific stories that are still told about our blood feuds and just the most demeaning ways to describe what is such a proud, incredible people. But it's important to know that those stereotypes were created by the coal industry. Mm-hmm. They were paid for by the coal industry, and they were printed in the New York Times and other publications, and have been for generations now, as a way to dehumanize the people of West Virginia, because it helps these industries exploit us, make us seem less important, and that we're sacrificed for the industrialization of America. And that's what's happened. And I think that's another reason it's so important. And I've spent the last 17 years of my life making documentary films about Appalachia, West Virginia in particular, so that the world could know us as we really are.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Sometimes I'm appalled at, for example, the depiction of Appalachian people in popular culture or whatever. If you made those kinds of caricatures or told those kinds of jokes about other groups of people, people would be rightfully offended, and they should be just as offended, I think, at turning anybody into stereotypes or caricatures. And a great point that you make, that it really is in the financial interest of the people who are exploiting both the region and the folks who live there. So thanks for pointing that out. And I guess that gets us to Blood on the Mountain, which I believe is your latest film. And unless you've made one since then and slipped it by me, but
no, Blood on the Mountain is our latest film, and it's available on Netflix 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Well, tell us about it. You came on the show and talked about it, but that was a while back. So if you don't mind repeating that, why don't you tell us what it's about?
We started making Blood on the Mountain on April 5th of 2010. That was the day that Massey UBB exploded and killed 29 coal miners in southern West Virginia, the worst coal mining industrial accident in 40 years. I happened to be there filming when it happened, and it was a profound experience, to say the least. But one of the things it really propelled me to do, having already made The Appalachians and Coal Country, was to find out what the real history of southern West Virginia was. Because as much as the history of West Virginia as a state has been bastardized, and censored for industry. The history of southern West Virginia was unknown, even to most of us throughout West Virginia. These stories, such as Hawk's Nest, where up to thousands of primarily Black migrant workers were sacrificed while building a tunnel for Union Carbide, that tunnel being full of silica dust. And then when those Black migrant workers died, their bodies were literally thrown over the hill. It was only about 9 years ago, some of their bodies were found on a farm in Somersville while they were building a road, and baby caskets. 683 of them were uncovered, each of them containing bodies of those Black migrant workers who were recruited from Jim Crow South to come to the hills of West Virginia and who never returned.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. I mean, so many of the stories are so heartbreaking. Your film is so powerful, and you know, there have been throughout many years, centuries, really, certainly more than 100 years. The tragic stories of the coal mines have been recorded, and I think there again, not only is a deep human drama being played out and still being played out today, but you know, people forget, for example, the radical history. You know, people think of West Virginia as "quote unquote" red state, but people forget the radical and inspiring history of miners organizing in that state in response to disasters like these, right?
Well, you know, Blood on the Mountain is not only the history of West Virginia as a state. Blood on the Mountain is the history of the American labor movement, which began in 1921 at the Battle of Blair Mountain, West Virginia, which is in the film, where over 10,000 coal miners and farmers and all of us decided we'd rather die than to live in the conditions we were living in those coal camps. Children 6 years old were going down in the mines. There was no regard for life, let alone any decency. And so the Battle of Blair Mountain really led to the strength of the United Mine Workers of America, and in turn to the labor movement in this country. So yes, Richard, you're absolutely right. The way that we're portrayed in the media is not who we really are. We are a red state, but we're a redneck state. And I want to use the term redneck in the correct way so everyone understands. Those coal miners that went to Blair Mountain to die for their rights to organize, they had only one thing, and that one thing that was given to them by the coal companies was a red bandana. They gave those miners the red bandanas to keep out union organizers, to be able to identify you know, who was there to incite organization and unionization in those mines. So the red bandana has become symbolic to us as that of labor in this country, unions in this country, and revolution in this country that has taken place for workers. Blair Mountain was the largest civil uprising, insurrection in this country next to the Civil War. And I'm thrilled to say that after decades of fighting, Blair Mountain had been removed by the governor and by the coal companies in order to continue to mine it. But in July of this year, Blair Mountain was once again put back on the National Register of Historic Places. We like to say that we won the second battle of Blair Mountain. And part of that, just briefly, is the West Virginia teacher strike, which came as well and has inspired states all over this country to organize and to follow the teachers of West Virginia, who are giving rebirth to the labor movement as we speak.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up. And once again, we're talking with Mari-Lynn Evans, who is a filmmaker, and her most recent film is Blood on the Mountain. Mari-Lynn, I'm so glad you brought that up because, you know, it's interesting. not only seeing your film, but I've been reading a lot of labor history recently. And the reason I've been reading labor history is because they're kind of rolling back it feels anyway, like they're rolling back a lot of the advances the labor movement made. It feels like we're going back to the 19th century in some ways. And so I've been wanting to go back and see how did we do it the first time? Because I think we need to do it again. We need to fight those, hopefully not with the bloodshed, but we need to fight the same kind of battles for our rights as workers, as people, as citizens that we had to fight before. And the West Virginia teachers strike, just as Blair Mountain, always comes up in those labor histories because it was such a pivotal turning point. And you imagine the courage it took to stand up to that. And now you have the West Virginia teachers strike, really spontaneously arising from these teachers who were looking out not just for themselves, but for other state workers, and not just for other state workers, but for the children, and making sure they get what they need, their students, and then that spreading to other states. That to me was a great moment in a couple of years of not a lot of great moments, to be honest. So I guess what I would say is, from your point of view, how did you see that teachers strike coming together? Like, even though I'm just an hour from West Virginia, it feels like, I don't know, it feels like this sort of spark just lit off, and I'm just curious to know how it looked to you there in West Virginia. Well,
it was incredible. It was because I was part of, it happening. And I thought, I wonder if this is how it would have felt being at Blair Mountain in 1921. And one of the things that I could help contribute was helping with media. And I think one of the key things that was decided early on was that the West Virginia state teachers would wear the red bandana in acknowledgement of the 1921 Battle of Blair Mountain. And to frame this strike as exactly what it was is these problems that workers across the world, workers in America are having, the disrespect, the lack of concern, the right to work legislation that is cropping up all over. Unions are the reason we have a middle class in this country. And so when you talk about losing your rights to unionize or to organize, there is no protection between you and the corporation. And as we've seen in Blood on the Mountain and seen throughout history, when corporations are allowed to do anything they want to do, they will take everything they can take. And like they did in West Virginia, when the coal companies went bankrupt, those UMWA coal miners, those retirees that had worked so long for those companies, so hard, truly honoring their work, many of it, generations of coal miners. And the coal companies simply went bankrupt and were allowed to not pay those retirees their pensions or their health care.
Yeah, we could go on and on about the horrors that corporations will inflict on people, right, if they get the chance. And we can also take the flip side and say, if you get weekends off, if you get overtime pay, if you get health benefits, or ever got them in your working life, thank the union movement, because the bosses didn't give those to you out of the goodness of their heart. They did it because somewhere, absolutely, a union organized, and then even if your workplace isn't organized, doesn't have a union, that at some point in history, the bosses there knew they had to compete with places that did have these union benefits. So I think it's so important. And getting back to West Virginia's role in all of this, and the way people see West Virginia, one of the things I've gotten from your work, Mari-lynn Evans, it's just emphasized to me, and I've had this sense, and I'm also thinking about you. Well, first of all, before I go into this, you are involved with, or maybe I think you started up the Mother Jones Community Foundation, right?
That's right. When we were finishing Blood on the Mountain with Coal Country, with our other films, we contribute any profits from the film. And so we set up, in this case, the Mother Jones Community Foundation. And Maria Gano, who is featured in the film, she's a Goldman Prize winner. She grew up down there in West Virginia, and she's been fighting against mountaintop removal and fighting for the people of West Virginia as our executive director. And what we're doing is taking storefronts and working with companies like Kroger, which has announced a free food program for low-income people, also daycare centers, retraining centers. Broadband is a terrible issue in West Virginia. People cannot do business because there is no broadband service. So one of the things that we're working on is with Microsoft on small grant projects to help build broadband throughout the area. And one of the other things that we're focused on right now is developing a 24-hour crisis, suicide, and opioid hotline because it doesn't exist. And there is such a tremendous need for it. But these centers are going to be located in whatever community is interested in having them. We will help them in every way, obtain funding, but the obligation, the commitment has to come from the community. And we're also then working with high technology companies, one KMX, which is based in Canada, to do a demonstration project on a new technology that will not only extract rare earth minerals from those impoundments, but will stabilize those impoundments at the same time, meaning that it will avoid, through this technology, these impoundments breaking. And rare earth minerals are extremely important, most of them being found only in China. And they are a real national security issue for us because those rare earth minerals are needed in our cell phones and our other technology. So as well as being community-based, we are also working with companies like that, a solar company, and other industries to bring business to West Virginia. I think we have a really strong case to make for the people of West Virginia and why investment should be made there. And we are really reaching out and attracting businesses, like I said, as Microsoft, who've already given one of their first grants to help develop renewables in the state of West Virginia, along with jobs.
Which is great, and I love the work you guys are doing. And I do want to talk a little bit more, if we may, Mari-lynn Evans, about impoundments, and just for our folks who, including me, frankly, who might not have heard the word before, coming across you, what is an impoundment?
There are over 100 of these coal slurry impoundments in West Virginia. And what they are is all of the waste products, all of the toxins that come from cleaning coal are just dumped in these impoundments. Most of them you can't see because they're far back and sort of hidden. They're monstrous. Each of these impoundments contain around 10 billion gallons of coal slurry. So that's each one of them.
So are these, let me just jump in for a second. Are these, sometimes in traveling that part of the country, I have seen like what look like artificial flat mountains that might have something like liquid inside them.
Right.
Is that what we're talking about here?
That's sort of like, that's probably what you've seen. Yeah. The Brushy Fork impoundment, which is featured in Blood on the Mountain, that impoundment alone is taller than the Hoover Dam. Mm. And what's truly frightening is every time there's a lot of rain in West Virginia, or there's 500 of these impoundments throughout Appalachia, or these hurricanes, people in these communities are absolutely terrified because it is inevitable. If you look at the research and reports from the Office of Surface Mining, OSMRE, that these impoundments have not been, none of them are regularly inspected. And there's a limit to how much liquid each of these impoundments can hold. One example of what happens in a disaster like this is, what happened at Buffalo Creek in West Virginia when Governor Arch Moore was the governor in the 70s, where hundreds of people were immediately killed and thousands were left homeless. And some of these impoundments that we're talking about, Richard, are designed just like Buffalo Creek was. They're built on abandoned coal mines. So the stability of them is just not there. And so it's a concern we have as activists, reached out to every federal and state agency. We've made our concerns known to them, and we still are, because that is a disaster just waiting to happen.
I was thinking about them because I saw the press release that the Mother Jones Community Foundation put out on Hurricane Florence, and now, fortunately, for many reasons, Hurricane Florence petered out before it reached West Virginia, although it caused some $38 billion worth of damage, and a lot of other people suffered as a result. But, in this era where climate change is causing these increasingly ferocious and frequent storms, I imagine this is a source of ongoing fear for the people of West Virginia.
Richard, I cannot express strongly enough the fear that people living down there have every time there is a heavy rainstorm. I get phone calls from friends down there who are terrified. We are working, Mari-lynn and I now, to get a warn system based down there in those southern counties, because if there is an emergency, most people don't have a cell phone. A lot of people don't have a landline, and so there's no way to even notify them and give them a warning. So that's something else that we have taken on because it is so needed. And at this point, that's what we as Native West Virginians are doing. Each of us is stepping up and taking the role that we are most capable of achieving in the projects that we're most, able to accomplish. And that is the commitment of the people of West Virginia. We love our home, and we're just not going to see it literally be destroyed. After what the fossil fuel companies have left behind, the drug addiction, the poverty, the helplessness, the hopelessness of people, it's difficult to inspire. But I think we all realize that our brothers and sisters will not survive without our help.
I think it's so great that you guys are doing this organizing, and so important. But I keep thinking, as we're talking, Mari-lynn, about the failure, what feels like a failure of democratic process here for the people of West Virginia. It feels like, I'm hearing that.
You would be correct, Richard.
Okay, well, because let's think about it for a second. For our audience, you've got no early warning system for these impoundments that threaten so many human lives. You have no inspections of these impoundments. You have poverty getting worse in West Virginia since the president they helped elect. You have a state government that isn't working for them, and I think, and I look from a national perspective too, and I think the way the United States as a whole is treating the people of West Virginia, they're treating it like a colony. This is how colonies get treated.
That's right.
They have governments that don't
represent. We've been treated like a colony since we were created as a state.
Yeah, I mean, a government that doesn't represent them, that probably is in some way or another corrupt, and we can talk about the West Virginia Supreme Court too, but a government that doesn't represent them is dominated by big money, an environment that's being raped and despoiled, a population that's falling further into poverty, massive drug addiction. This is the story, this is really an overlooked story for a lot of people, including a lot of people who consider themselves progressive, of what we're doing to the people of West Virginia, right?
Absolutely. And Chris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who is featured in Blood on the Mountain, talks about the Appalachian Mountains, the Appalachian people, as being a sacrifice zone for, these are the people that created the Industrial Revolution. These miners risk their lives every day to power this country. And that's all over now. Economically, culturally, it's over. It's never going to be the way it was. If coal was making money and there was a market for it, you better believe they would be blowing up the few mountains that are left down there to get the last lump of coal and the last pound of flesh. So what's happened is the companies have literally just left, and what that has exposed is what the true cost of coal has been. What it's also exposed is there is no entity to plead to for mercy or justice when you have the West Virginia Supreme Court, every one of them under impeachment. Senator Manchin, who is the Democratic senator from West Virginia, voting for Brett Kavanaugh, which has, on top of his other decisions, he votes mainly Republican, has just further deteriorated the Democratic Party or the democratic process in West Virginia. Our governor, Jim Justice, owes millions in back taxes to a state that is bordering on bankruptcy, and to this day has not paid his taxes. It is so insulting. It is so outrageous the way the people of West Virginia have been treated, because, Richard, it has, since its beginning, West Virginia is the only state created during the Civil War. It was created as a natural resource colony. And that's what's happened to us. The timber's been taken, natural gas has been taken, the coal has been taken, and nothing has been left behind for the people, the natives of that land. And so at this point, it really is up to us to stand up and lead, because there are no leaders for us right now. And I think many of us realize, we have a moral obligation to each other. And part of that moral obligation is to stand up and to speak out and to work for what's right and what's just.
Well, let's hope that out of that comes a new model. Maybe the people of West Virginia can even come up with a model for self-organizing and changing their condition, and maybe eventually changing their politics that the rest of the country can follow. Because I think that, what the corporations are doing to West Virginia is, in some ways, I mean, obviously it's uniquely a colony, but in some ways, isn't it also kind of a glimpse of the sort of dystopian future of the rest of the country too, if we don't do something about it? The extraction, the leaving people in poverty, the corruption. Shouldn't everybody be worried about that too?
I think so. And I know, Blood on the Mountain, being on Netflix, the response to that film, Richard, at the beginning, when I told people I was making a documentary about the true history of West Virginia and the labor movement in America, I think the response from most people was, who's going to care? And I have to tell you, a lot of people care. And a lot of people have reached out to me, have reached out to all of us. And I tell you, it is so inspiring to me that at the end of this film, yeah, it's a very difficult film. There are some very hard lessons to be learned, but I truly believe, at the end of it, there is hope, because we, each of us, have the power to stand up and to resist what's wrong and to fight for what's right. And I think West Virginians, we've always been very self-reliant. We've been isolated. We've had to become very self-reliant. And I think that strength that the world saw in 1921 at the Battle of Blair Mountain, which they saw this year with the West Virginia teachers' strike, you're going to continue to see from the people of West Virginia and Appalachia, because we have no one to rely on but ourselves, and we know that now. And it's a difficult time for sure in West Virginia, but I promise you, Richard, you wait until you see our comeback.
All right. Well, we'll be looking for it, and we'll be following it. So people can see Blood on the Mountain on Netflix. Where can they go to find out more about what you're doing?
They can go to our website, which is www.bloodonthemountain.com. They can contact us there, and we'll be putting up more information daily on both our Facebook, our Twitter, and other social media, letting people know how they can connect, how they can help, how they can become part of the movement to reclaim and recreate West Virginia.
Well, thanks so much for all your great work, Mari-lynn Evans. The film, again, is Blood on the Mountain, and thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, Richard, thank you so much, and thank you for letting people know about West Virginia and the people there and our struggle, and it's just so important. Thank you so much.
It's an honor.